Welcome to the Choral Connection, a series of interviews with musicians with whom Maestro Harold Rosenbaum has collaborated over his 47-year international conducting career. We hope you are inspired by their artistry and the stories they have to tell. For more about the series, please visit www.haroldrosenbaum.com.
Greetings, everybody. Today, I'm so happy to have Karen Siegel and Daniel Andor, and I'll explain who they are in a moment, but basically, we're here to talk about C4, the Choral Composer Conductor Collective, which is a unique choral ensemble of singers, composers, and conductors. It exists to enrich artists and audiences alike through passionate advocacy of new choral works, forming pieces written within the last 25 years, premiering and commissioning new choral works, and mentoring emerging singers, composers, and conductors of today's choral music. It is the first organization of its kind and one of the few choral groups in the nation to focus exclusively on the music of our time, performing only music written in the last 25 years. I am here with Karen Siegel, the founder of C4 and a wonderful composer. I speak from experience, having conducted one of her pieces, Confessions from the Blogosphere, with my New York Virtuoso singers. Joining us is Daniel Andor, who I am sure is another wonderful composer, although I have never conducted a piece by him. And Daniel joined C4 in its second year. So before we go on, I would like you to just talk about yourselves a little bit and also the group before I ask some questions. Karen, do you want to start?
Sure. So thank you, Harold. As a founding member of C4, I think in a way talking about myself and talking about the group is rather intertwined because I think my involvement with the group has been a major force in my development as a composer and certainly in my focusing so much on choral music. The vast majority of my works are for choir. So I've grown as a composer with C4, even as I went and got degrees in composition and studied at the CUNY Graduate Center with Tanya Leon. I still learned so much from my colleagues in C4 and my experiences with C4 that was not offered to me in the degree programs.
Practical knowledge, just from rehearsing and performing and getting
Right.
feedback.
Experimenting and seeing what happens, and learning to write for all the voice parts, and learning how to write works that are really doable in the time constraints of the rehearsal process.
Oh yeah, that's important. And Dan, you came aboard in the second year, and tell us about yourself.
Yeah, I think the way Karen explained the role of C4 in her musical career, I think also applies to me. I did study composition in high school at the Purcell School, and then went on, conducting at university. But my career went into science, so I became a scientist. And when I landed in New York, C4 played a significant role in rekindling my both my participation in singing, in music, conducting, and also gave me the courage to compose again. And similar to what Karen was saying, I really learned about choral writing, which is something I'd rarely done in the past, through practice, through being immersed in the C4 process, and seeing how the other composers in C4 did it, and conducting choral pieces myself. These all contributed to help me try and learn about choral writing as well.
Okay, so thank you for telling me about yourselves. I'm curious about the process, the whole process. What goes on? How do you choose conductors? How do you choose pieces? Does the conductor's own piece always get chosen by? Let me say that again. Does the piece the conductor wrote always get conducted by him or her? And And one more thing. I know I'm asking questions at one time. How does one get into the group? If somebody declares him or herself a composer and can sight read very well and has a very pleasant voice, are they automatically in without the quality control, without you having seen any of the works that you wrote?
That's a lot of questions.
I know.
I guess I could start by saying there's a distinction when we let people into the group. We only really care about how good a singer they are and musician. So we decided a long time back not to filter at all for compositional skill or style. And that's been working pretty well. If someone does not have a high enough level of compositional skill, then we can help them or help nurture them towards having performance ready works. So it's not a guarantee that their works will be performed, but if I'm at an audition and someone shows a composition that I don't think is really so great, that's not a reason to not let them into the group. For conducting, we have a separate conducting audition, people who want to conduct. So again, if someone is not a strong conductor, but they think of themselves as a conductor or they want to become a better conductor, if they're a strong singer and musician, we'll still let them into the group. And then we'll work with them and give them opportunities to become a better conductor so that they can be ready to take on their own piece.
Go ahead, Daniel.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna. I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about how we choose conductor, how we pair conductors, and how we pick rep. Maybe I can talk a little bit about the conducting aspect of it. Our process has sort of varied a little bit over the years, but the main goal is that we try to find consensus and we try to take into account the whole picture of both of what the conductor would like to conduct, so the conductor's tastes and preferences, and also what we think the conductor's skills are best matched with, which pieces are best matched with which conductor. And we also try to provide opportunities for conductors as well. So this is surprisingly hard. Sometimes harder, for instance, than picking soloists or even rep, I think. But basically, we sort of iterate and go over this process of figuring out how to match until we come to a consensus. Does that seem about right to you as well, Karen?
Yeah, I would just add that there's a very formal process that has come up over the years. I can't remember exactly whose idea it was, but we all write down the program, all the repertoire, and we write down everyone's names and we match them up. And we all choose what we think would be kind of the ideal lineup, a matching of conductors and compositions based on whose skill set would be a great match for that piece and who we think would their strengths would work really well with that particular piece. And then we go around and for each piece we kind of tally and see, oh, it looks like Daniel's piece that he wrote, 5 people thought that I would be a good choice to conduct it. That's interesting. And that's just kind of the beginning for the conversation. And then we go around and say our preferences. So sometimes it starts off with a really easy match where 5 out of 6 think I should conduct Daniel's piece. And it happens to be my first choice. No brainer. That's done. But then we have to go on and work everything else out. And then it's less clear. And often people have the same first preferences and
very tricky.
Yeah.
Very tricky. I mean, do you have a rule that the composer should not be the conductor of his or her own piece?
We do. We broke it this year, but we have that rule.
It's 2020.
Yeah, right.
Different in 2020. Well, for my piece, Here I Am, I conducted that, and that was largely just because no one else knew it. I mean, it was so fast. It was, hey, let's try to do this. Oh, great. Do you think we can have one more rehearsal and perform it? So,
Why was it so fast, a process?
oh, because it was our first live remote concert.
Oh, remote. Well, I'm not
Yeah.
talking about, 2020 remote.
But that's all what we're doing now. It's all remote, and the same things continue. The same general ideas are now applied to a new context. So it was very unusual that I would conduct my own piece. After that, when we started planning a little more and saying, okay, what do we want to perform besides, what we've just scrambled for, then we started planning out a little more.
And somehow do you make sure that everybody in the group has his or her own piece performed over a period of time, or does it always work out that?
It kind of works out that way. I don't think we make sure of it, but if someone wants their works performed, it's kind of up to them to present those works. And we have someone who's in charge of kind of wrangling the composers, the composer chair, communicating with them and saying, these are the deadlines for submitting your proposals. This is a deadline for submitting your new works. And sometimes it goes the other way around, that the composers meet and think about what they're interested in writing, and that can sometimes be the impetus for choosing a certain theme for a program.
And in cases where, sorry.
No, go ahead.
And in some cases, we've collaborated with with other ensembles. There, of course, if we were writing for the other ensemble, it's important we kind of agree on the forces there, or if we're hiring an instrumentalist. Those are some special occasions, but normally, your piece could be performed in this concert, or if not in this one, then the next. And so that's not such a big deal for most composers.
Given the egos of all of us artists, to me it's totally amazing that this group functions so well and has been around. And I mean, there are bound to be feelings, hurt feelings, or situations where you have to soothe somebody or promise. It's a very delicate balancing act that you've accomplished, I think.
I think it's worth noting that we do have a formal method for giving feedback and kind of working out, call it a feedback model. And I think we've really improved over the years with improving the communication between the people in the ensemble, and making sure that things don't fester, because people are encouraged to talk to each other about issues that come up. So
right.
If say I'm conducting in a way that bothers Daniel, he's supposed to tell me. He's supposed to. And if he doesn't because he's too busy or he forgets, then after the cycle is over, when we have our conductor feedback session, he'll say, oh yeah, I've been meaning to tell you that when you did XYZ, it really threw me for a loop. So we having those channels for communication helps. I won't say there's never been conflict. There has, but it's rare for it to be something that we can't work out amicably.
Well, I mean, go ahead.
I'm just going to say that we encourage feedback, and maybe this is something we'll get on to a little bit later about how to conduct when everyone wants to give you feedback, potentially real time, which is less than great. On the other hand, we have we acknowledge that there's enormous expertise in the group, singing, conducting, composing. And the question is how to harness that in a way where it's not completely chaotic. So we encourage feedback, but with feedback comes the responsibility of doing it at the right time and doing it respectfully. So for example, Karen mentioned this formal feedback session that conductors always have. And that's because conducting is such a kind of executive role. It sort of affects so much of the day-to-day that we feel like it's really important. We could have, that's the place where we have this formal feedback session. but in other areas, we also encourage feedback. And sometimes that could be a feedback to a composer. It could be a feedback to a conductor right after the rehearsal, right? It doesn't have to be at that feedback session. It could be a singer coming up to the conductor or the composer, hey, this bit is too high, or this is too challenging, or something. I need a breath. I need a breath is I think probably quite common. And also potentially also singers, but to respect people's egos, we do encourage taking a little bit of a process. I don't know. Karen, you alluded to this process. Do you want to elaborate on this, or?
Well, first of all, we just ask people to, when you're giving feedback, ask if it's a good time for feedback. It's kind of the, can I give you feedback now? Because sometimes the conductor will say, I'm sorry, I've got a lot on my mind right now. Can you email me later? Or we encourage the feedback to be in person unless the person receiving the feedback has indicated that they prefer another way. Or, sometimes by telephone if in person is impossible. So that's the first step. Ask if you can give feedback, and then start with something positive, and then the criticism, followed by a potential solution.
Are there any certified therapists in the group who can read or handle some problems?
I actually do have training in conflict resolution, but
okay.
I've never actually used. I used to be a trainer. One of my first jobs, just before Z4, was
Wow.
training middle school students and middle school teachers, staff, how to set up peer mediation programs, and training the kids in those programs how to mediate. But there hasn't really been a need for a session like that.
And with your own kids, I guess there's never any fighting because the mother is that's probably.
The only reason you don't hear them screaming right now is that my husband's playing video games with them.
Okay. Well, I have written down here 2 more questions, which I'll read, but I think you've answered every component of them. So let's just make sure. Have you ever had a situation where a piece's conductor, who is not the composer of the work, is in disagreement with some of the composer's intentions? And if so, how is that resolved? Let's start with that one. I don't think we've touched upon that. A conductor.
Well, I can say, but this is I want to say that Karen brought up this distinction between running the rehearsal, right? The rehearsal process versus musical interpretation, and the conductor has to do both. And I think it's fair to say that we occasionally have a bit of conflict in the first, but actually rarely in the second. So occasionally, there's disagreement about how to rehearse a piece, but I would say rarely, with perhaps very few exceptions, have we had an issue about interpretation of the piece. Yeah. I don't know, Karen, if you want to.
Generally, I think we defer to the composers as to what their intent is for the interpretation. Although I think quite often a conductor has an idea that the composer did not intend, and the composer will say, "Oh, all right, I like that." So I like that collaboration aspect. I think that enriches the pieces rather than having one person's creative vision be the only one involved. So I think
that's exactly the formula I use when I perform new music with the composer present, or either physically or they're across the country. Meeting. I always respect the composer's intentions, but there are countless ways the piece might be altered a bit, improved, which conductors. I mean, you don't have any. You'll never have really similar performances. If you listen to 2 performances of Beethoven's Fifth, the opening done 2 different ways. But of course, I want to respect the composer's intentions, as you know.
Yeah.
Along these lines, here's the other question I had. Are there times when, upon hearing a piece being rehearsed, the composer will want to make certain changes in volume, tempo, word underlay, etc.? And if so, is there always time to honor all of those requests?
So I think here's where there's a really big distinction between having a composer be a member of the ensemble and having a composer be not in the ensemble, because it would never occur to me that someone in the ensemble would suggest a change that we don't have time for, because they know what we have time for. So if they're
Excellent.
suggesting it, let's give it a shot. Whereas someone who's not familiar with us and is not familiar with how long we take to adapt to changes or how we rehearse, they might make a suggestion that's completely unreasonable for our group to succeed on.
Right.
So that doesn't tend to happen. The suggestions for change from the composers in the ensemble tend to be fairly minor and easy to accommodate.
That's great. Yeah, I had an experience once. I won't mention names, of course, but it was the dress rehearsal. I think I had 12 pieces, 12 new pieces on the program, and one of the composers just wanted to take too much time. And I just had to tell that person, I'm sorry, I have all these other pieces. Talk to me in the break. Let's talk on the phone afterward, whatever. Yeah, but as you said, being in the group, they know, they understand. They understand what
Yeah,
has to
and
wait.
it's helped me also as a composer working with other ensembles to know what type of, what in that dress rehearsal situation, I know not to suggest changes that are too big, because from practical experience, I know what type of feedback is helpful to an ensemble at that stage in the game, and it's not, and
Right.
working with C4 has helped to know that.
Yeah, and also what has helped me through the decades has been like training my choirs for other conductors, for orchestral conductors, and then knowing when and if I should, talk to them to improve things even while the rehearsal is going on, perhaps when there's a break, and the conductor is talking to the strings. I take 5 seconds just to shout out something, or I just defer. I just wait till the break. I mean, it's
Yeah.
a very interesting balancing act, but we do what we have to do to make it work. Are there any other choirs across the country which have used your organizational model and
Yes, there
so
are.
even more to be proud of?
Yeah, it's actually really exciting how we have inspired a whole countrywide network. The
Wow.
first ones were started by alumni of C4. So the first one was Triad in Boston, and then C4 LA. And then we found out about a group starting up in Austin, Texas, that did not have a direct connection to C4, but they just liked what we were doing and wanted to do something similar, and that's called Inversion Ensemble. And then there's a brand new group called Artifice Ensemble in DC that similarly did not have a direct connection to C4. So these 5 groups now, including C4, are all part of something we call the C4 network, and we have meetings periodically with representatives of all of the groups to help each other out. We share repertoire. We're in the midst of creating a repertoire database that's an online searchable tool to help people find repertoire for new choral music.
That
So
is
we help each other
amazing.
out.
That's a huge achievement. Yeah. I mean,
And now
look,
I just want to add that now that it doesn't matter where you are anymore because everything's remote, we're collaborating. So the C4 live streams, we've invited people from other C4 network ensembles to join us, and it's been particularly nice to get to know our colleagues in Austin.
Exactly
Working
that.
with them, there's been a really strong contingent from Austin, Texas joining us.
isn't Conspirare based in Austin? A professional choir, Craig Heller Johnson.
There are a number of good choirs in Austin. There's a nice scene there.
So maybe he'll find interest in some of those works. So they can try to interest him.
Maybe, but now it doesn't matter where you are.
Right, right. Well, I found one of, besides your piece, and he's Biggs, I've done his music, but the piece by Thomas Stump
Hmm.
that you did, I loved it immediately, and I told him when I came to your concert, and then I ended up doing it.
So Thomas Stumpf is now part of Triad in Boston.
Oh, very good.
He lives in Boston, and
Yeah,
he first started working with us as a composer, writing for us. Um,
nice.
yeah, and now he's connected with
Great
that
piece.
group and conducting with them.
And how about the size of the group? I don't know if we've told anybody here. And also, like, how do you try to get new members? Is there a turnover rate?
The size of our group has actually changed a bit over the years. We used to, when we first started, we had something called, we had the C4 on the regular, I don't know, what did we call it, Daniel?
Well, there was a chamber and then extended.
But what did we call it? Symphonic choir, did we call it?
Oh, symphonic, yes, that's the
Yeah,
one.
and so we had, for our first concert, we had 40 people in our symphonic choir, and then the Ian Moss, whose idea C4 was in the first place, he he was really excited to tell everyone that we were the largest new music choir in the country because we had 40 people
For that one concert.
two concerts. And then we realized that the symphonic model didn't really hold up. We had trouble with retention. They weren't as invested in the group. They were very peripheral. So I'm not sure exactly how long it took before we switched over to a single ensemble. I remember it was a little rough at first because there were um, different expectations for the two ensembles. And so when we merged into one, it was kind of a last minute decision, and we had some hard repertoire programmed that was too challenging for some of the members of the previous symphonic choir, and that was a little bit of a rocky concert, so I wouldn't recommend doing a sudden transition like that. But we stuck with a single model, and over time we resolved that issue, and the level of the singers has actually gone up over the years, and this smaller, well, maybe a little larger, this is medium size ensemble, because at first the chamber choir was only like 12 or 14, and the large group was 30 to 40, and now we have a steady group of about 25.
Now, you don't have to tell me the actual history of the actual event or events here. We can be theoretical about it, but I started my Canticorum Virtuosi 47 years ago, and I've had to let go maybe 80 people over the years. Out of the 700 or so I've had to let them go for various reasons, like they started to smoke and they started flatting and things like that, whether they didn't learn the music. Are you the person, or is there a process of theoretically, if you had to
There
let
is actually it's kind of old process. I don't think we've used it in a while. I'm not sure it's still active. But we used to have a process where if someone was not meeting the expectations, the membership chair, first of all, is the person in charge of communicating with those people. So they would have a talk with the person and kind of give them a warning and like explain that we were concerned about, say, they're not coming to rehearsal prepared well enough. And if that continued to be a problem, then we might consider asking them not to return. But we've moved on from that to a more, I don't think we've had to really deal with that in recent times. I think maybe it's because we're selecting better, or I think we're more aware now that who's a good match for the ensemble. So if we're making good choices about who's a good match, then we don't have to worry about that. But there have been very few times when someone I think I can think of 2 instances over 15 years where there was someone who, for various reasons, just was not able to stay in the ensemble. And in both instances, it was not because of musical ability or being prepared. It was kind of more interpersonal reasons.
Right. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the number 15, because I was going to say that I agree with you that for some reason, and I think I agree with you about the reason you just stated, I haven't, over the last 15 years or so, I've not had to let anybody go. I
Interesting.
think with age, you have wisdom, you gain
Yeah.
wisdom about sort of know who's going to work out more in the beginning.
And I think
So,
also as the quality of our ensemble has gone up, we can be more selective.
right.
So in the earlier years, we kind of had to take what we could get a little more. So
Right.
I think we've are more likely to be really pleased with the new singers that we select.
Daniel, you wanted to say something?
Oh, I just wanted to say that I think also most people who join want to enjoy singing at least, right? And if it's a poor fit because the repertoire is too hard, for instance, then I think people realize that, and it's not like we have to ask people to leave. Then they're like, okay, I'd rather not, you know,
Right.
there is a certain amount of self-selection going on.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else either of you want to say before we stop this interview? It's been a pleasure. I learned so much, and I'm sure our audience learned a great deal about your inspiring future and your achievements. Anything else you want to add?
Aaron, did you want to say anything?
I guess I could just want to emphasize a little bit that we're still growing and improving and kind of learning lessons about what we can do better. So there are still many ways we can improve, and I think we're aware of those. And I like the fact that we discuss that issue. We have collectivity meetings where we say, how are we doing? What can we improve on? Our last collectivity meeting before the pandemic resulted in the formation of a diversity community. And we're asking questions like, how come we have such trouble retaining members of color when they join? How are we responsible for not helping them to feel comfortable in this majority white group? What can we do about that? We're starting to ask some of those difficult questions, and we now look at the diversity of the composers as a factor in choosing our repertoire, because if 90% of the repertoire is by white men, or white men and women, that's still not reflective of the community, and it does our audience a disservice as well. And taking the time to look for composers whose voices might not have been heard, who come from underrepresented groups, taking the time to find those pieces really enriches both our concerts and enriches all of us. So,
right.
That's something we're working on now, and we have not achieved that goal. We're starting to really work on diversity as an issue, and I think we could point to other areas as well that we can improve. But I like at least that we're conscious of the fact that a group is should be always changing and improving.
Right. Excellent. It reminds me of an interview I recently had with Diane Birkin-Mennica, the founder of the Brooklyn Youth Chorus, where many years ago before she started world class and huge, she wanted to make sure it was represented the community in which they live. And it was working. So yeah, it's a very good group. Francisco Nunez's children's chorus. So it's great. Everything about this is wonderful. Okay, let's stay on for a moment. I want to, after we leave, I want to just leave what marks. I want to just talk to you about something. What I'm saying now will be edited out, I'm sure. But
so Harold,
thank you.
oh.
No, go ahead.
Oh, you asked if there's anything we wanted to emphasize. I would emphasize, especially since you're a conductor, what an interesting and a strange experience it is to have the conductor rotate in and out of the group during a rehearsal and concert, and the fact that, and I think it's hard to grasp that has both practical and psychological effects. So the practical effects are obviously, there's someone else standing in front of you, might have a different style, and that has consequences, right? Pros and cons. But the psychological aspect of it is that you might be sitting next to the person. You're being conducted by your peers. I might be the composer, and the person that's sitting next to me might be going up and conducting my piece, and then maybe we switch. And there's a challenge there's a challenge for the group and the conductor to afford that person that temporary authority required to actually run a rehearsal efficiently, right? And that's one of the most interesting aspects of the ensemble, that both the conductors and the composers are sitting among you and are true peers because they are singing with you, and not just I don't want to say not just sitting in the audience, but not in the sort of traditional sense, like the composer is sitting in the front row and the conductor is on the podium. We really are. It feels very different. Having been in both sorts of ensembles, I can say it feels really different. That's what I wanted to say.
I think it helps create an atmosphere that the conductors and composers are accessible. Especially conductors being accessible as compared to in other ensembles. People might not feel comfortable going up to a conductor at the break and explaining how something they're doing is confusing them.
Right. And also there's a built-in support system, because I'm sure you cheer on your colleagues and stand up there, and some of them won't have that much experience conducting. Encouragement throughout the process. It's great.
Yeah, certainly. I like to say I graduated from the School of C4. As a conductor, I certainly have. I mean, the first concert, I didn't know what I was doing. A little bit of training as a conductor, but really minimal.
Well, don't worry. I told all your singers not to say anything to you about your conducting 15 years ago when you first started. I'm only kidding.
Well, then we all took your course, right, Harold?
Yes. I went to one of your seminars in your home, and that was really helpful.
Yes,
that was really awesome. Yes.
Well, I'm willing to do it anytime, when this thing is over, or even online. I enjoy that very much. Thank you both so much. This has been enlightening and wonderful, and congratulations, and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Harold.
Thank you, Harold.
You're welcome. Take care.
Call